Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Final Destination Bloodlines in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, West Films Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Final Destination Bloodlines. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you. I am also going to give you all the information on which OTT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-pre-production budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storylines, StarCast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. Start the video. Final Destination Bloodlines is a 2025 American supernatural horror film directed by Lipovsky and Adam Stein and written by Guy Busick and Laurie Evans Taylor, based on a story developed by them and John Watts. It is the sixth installment in the Final Destination film series following Final Destination 5, 2011. The film stars Kaitlyn Juana as a college student who inherits visions of a previous premonition that averted a deadly structural failure in 1968 from her dying grandmother and is warned that death is coming for her family. Teo Briones, Richard Harmon, Owen Patrick Joyner, Anna Lore, Breck Bassinger, and Tony Todd appear in supporting roles. After the commercial success of Final Destination 5, a new film entered development, described as a reimagining of the franchise. In March 2020, series producer Craig Perry said the film would be set in the world of first responders, and in October that year, series creator Jeffrey Reddick confirmed it was the sixth film in the franchise. In January 2022, the film was planned to be released on the streaming service HBO Max, with Lipovsky and Stein as directors and Busick joining Taylor as co-writer for the film. In March 2024, Warner Bros. Pictures announced that the film would instead receive a theatrical release. Filming took place in Vancouver from March to May 2024, following delays due to the SAG-AFTRA strike. In 1969, Iris Campbell and her fiancé Paul attend the opening ceremony of the Skyview, a high-rise restaurant tower. At the dance party, Iris has a premonition of a chandelier shard cracking the glass floor beneath the guests while a gas leak explodes, collapsing the tower and killing everyone. In the present, college student Stephanie Reyes suffers from recurring nightmares about the collapse. Realizing that the nightmares are linked to her maternal grandmother, Iris, she returns home seeking answers and is greeted by her father, Marty, and her estranged brother, Charlie. The siblings visit their Uncle Howard, Aunt Brenda, and cousins Eric, Julia, and Bobby. When Stephanie asks Howard about Iris, he explains that Iris subjected him and Stephanie's mother Darlene to an overprotective upbringing, then became reclusive, causing Darlene to abandon the family. Brenda helps Stephanie find letters from Iris, leading her to a fortified cabin where Iris now lives. Terminally ill, Iris tells Stephanie she disrupted Death's design by preventing the tower's collapse, saving the lives of everyone there that night. As a result, Death began killing the survivors in the order they would have died at the Skyview, along with their descendants who were never meant to exist. Paul later died in an accident, prompting Iris to document Death's omens in a book and live in isolation to prevent it from going after her family. Though Stephanie is skeptical, Iris leaves the cabin to give her the book and allows herself to be impaled by a weather vane to prove her claims. After Iris's funeral, Darlene returns, but Stephanie resents her for being absent since childhood. Stephanie reads Iris's book and sees a reference to someone Iris knew named JB, who found someone that defeated death. During a family barbecue, a chain reaction causes Howard to be killed by a lawnmower. That night, another chain reaction causes a fire at Eric's tattoo shop, but he survives due to his leather clothing. Stephanie and Charlie meet Eric on the road to protect him from street hazards, but Julia is crushed to death by a garbage truck's compactor. The family realizes that death is coming for them in order of age, starting with Howard's branch of the family before moving on to Darlene's. Marty and Brenda are spared, as they are not blood relatives, and Eric is spared due to being the result of Brenda's affair. Darlene suggests visiting JB at a hospital, who turns out to be William Bloodworth. Present at the Skyview as a child and the last to die in the premonition, he reveals that he spent most of his life exchanging ideas with Iris to learn death's rules. He explains 2 ways to defeat death: taking another life, A, or dying and being revived, citing Kimberly Corman as a successful example, B. Retiring from his job as the coroner, Bloodworth leaves the hospital, expecting to succumb to his own illness after Iris's bloodline dies, and wishes the family luck before departing. Eric convinces Bobby to employ Bloodworth's second strategy, where he feeds Bobby a snack containing nuts, which he is allergic to, so he could be subsequently revived. The plan backfires when a malfunctioning MRI machine rips Eric's piercings out, pulls him in, and impales him with a wheelchair. A coil from a vending machine is also launched and drilled into Bobby's head. Despite Eric seemingly being safe, Stefani reasons that his intervention trying to help Bobby put him on the list too. Stefani, Charlie, and Darlene decide to drive to Iris's cabin, intending to hide from death. The RV crashes and Stefani's seatbelt jams. The cabin explodes after a chain reaction, sending the RV into water as Stefani begins to drown. Darlene saves Charlie and pleads with him to rescue Stefani before a lamppost bisects her. Charlie breaks the seatbelt and successfully resuscitates Stefani with CPR. A week later, the father of Charlie's prom date tells the siblings that Stefani was not dead when Charlie revived her, since her heart never stopped. At that moment, a train derails into the neighborhood, causing several logs to fall onto Stefani and Charlie, killing them. Cast. Further information on individual characters. List of Final Destination characters. Kaitlyn Juana as Stefani Reyes, a college student haunted by nightmares of a 1968 tower collapse. Teo Briones as Charlie Reyes, Stefani's younger brother. Richard Harmon as Eric Campbell, one of Stefani's cousins. Owen Patrick Joyner as Bobby Campbell, one of Stefani's cousins. Raya Kihlstedt as Darlene Campbell, Stefani and Charlie's estranged mother and Iris's daughter. Anna Lohr as Julia Campbell, one of Stefani's cousins. Gabrielle Rose as Iris Campbell, Stefani's grandmother who had a premonition in 1968-8. Breck Bassinger as a young Iris. Tony Todd as William Bloodworth. Jaden Onaya as a young William. Tinpo Lee as Marty Reyes, Stefani's father. April Telek as Brenda Campbell, Stefani's aunt. Alex Zahara as Howard Campbell, Stefani's uncle and Iris's son. Max Lloyd-Jones as Paul Campbell, Iris's husband. Brenna Llewellyn as Val, Stefani's college roommate. Yvette Ferguson as Beatrice Fuller, an elderly woman present in the tower's collapse in 1968. Mark Brandon as Mr. Fuller, an elderly man present in the tower's collapse in 1968. Production prior to the release of Final Destination 5 in 2011, series actor Tony Todd said that if the film were to be successful, 2 sequels would be filmed back-to-back, 10. In January 2019, New Line Cinema announced a new installment was in development. Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan wrote the initial script, described as a reimagining of the franchise. In March 2020, series producer Craig Perry said the film would be set in the world of first responders and feature EMTs, firefighters, and police officers. When asked if it was in the same canon as the previous installments, he said, "Reboot is probably too strong of a word. It makes it sound like they're going to change everything, but it's definitely a Final Destination movie." In October 2021, Laurie Evans Taylor was reported to be the new writer for the film. In January 2022, HBO Max announced it would distribute the film. John Watts joined the project as a producer, and Taylor was confirmed to have written the screenplay alongside Guy Busick. That July, Reddick revealed the film would differ from the franchise's formula. In September that year, Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein were selected from over 200 candidates to direct the film. During a meeting with executives and producers from New Line to make their pitch, Lipovsky and Stein staged a freak accident like the ones in the films at the end of the call. Insiders said the joke, which featured a combination of pre-recorded footage and visual effects and demonstrated the filmmakers' passion for the film, got them hired. In September 2023, Todd officially signed on to reprise his role as William Bloodworth. The film explores the character's backstory. Despite Todd's death in November 2024, Warner Bros. Confirmed that he had shot all of his scenes for the film. In March 2024, it was announced that the film would be released in theaters by Warner Bros. Pictures in 2025. Most of the cast was also revealed. 71-year-old stuntwoman Yvette Ferguson came out of retirement for a fire stunt in the premonition scene, which director Lipovsky believes to be a world record for the oldest person set on fire on camera. Principal photography was scheduled to take place in Vancouver, British Columbia from July to October 2023, but in mid-July, production was delayed due to the SAG-AFTRA strike. With Christian Sebald as cinematographer, filming instead took place in Vancouver from March 4th to May 13, 2024. Tim Wynn was hired to compose the score by December 2024. Music. Soundtrack. The soundtrack to Final Destination Bloodlines was released by Lakeshore Records on the same day as the film's release. The soundtrack contains 32 tracks composed by Tim Wynn. It is the third Final Destination soundtrack album to be released. Release. Final Destination Bloodlines was released in the United States by Warner Bros. Pictures on May 16, 2025, and it was released internationally 2 days prior to its official U.S. release. The film was filmed for IMAX and will be released in both IMAX and standard formats. A double bill special screening was shown in select theaters on May 9th and 10, a week before the film's release, which included the original 2000 film. A prank screening was held on Mother's Day, with the film being retitled To Love at the Sky View. Filmgoers watched the film with their mothers, who were under the assumption it was a romantic comedy. The film's trailer was released on March 25, 2025, across 65 markets and was available in 44 different language versions. As calculated by Wave Metrics, it garnered 178.7 million views worldwide within the first 24 hours, making it the second most watched horror film trailer, behind New Line's It with 200 million views. Reception. Box office. As of May 22, 2025, Final Destination Bloodlines has grossed $67.1 million in the United States and Canada and $54.1 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $121.2 million. In the United States and Canada, Bloodlines was released alongside Hurry Up Tomorrow and was projected to gross $35 to $40 million from 3,523 theaters in its opening weekend. The film made $21 million on its first day, including an estimated $5.5 million from Thursday night previews. It went on to debut to $51.6 million, finishing first at the box office. Its opening weekend was the biggest for the franchise, even adjusted for inflation, besting the Final Destination $27.4 million opening weekend in 2009. Critical response? The film became the best-reviewed installment in the franchise. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 92% of 170 critics' reviews are positive. The website's consensus reads, adding some surprising emotional layers onto the ghoulish bones of Final Destination's mythology, Bloodlines ingeniously executes grisly set pieces with precision and turns impending doom into outrageous fun. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 73 out of 100, based on 35 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale, while those surveyed by PostTrack gave it an average 4 out of 5 stars, with 69% saying they would definitely recommend the film. Todd Gilchrist of Variety called the film clever, unpredictable, and fun, and praised Todd's performance as a tender tribute to the horror luminary and retroactive connective tissue between the franchise's disparate chapters. Frank Scheck of The Hollywood Reporter wrote that the film gives its audiences exactly what they expect, namely a series of ingeniously designed, diabolical Rube Goldberg-style fatalities that are mostly so within the realm of possibility that you'll find yourself crossing the street very carefully after you leave the theater. He also praised Todd's appearance as a poignant reminder that in real life, as in these movies, death comes for everybody. Future. Stein noted that the narrative potential remains open-ended, emphasizing the complex and time-consuming nature of developing such films. While he acknowledged the possibility of future installments, he indicated that the creative process requires significant effort and innovation. Perry similarly expressed openness to continuing the franchise, noting that Bloodlines has expanded the creative flexibility of the series, allowing for new narrative directions and connections across different periods. Final Destination Bloodlines Review. If the defining tone of the most successful Final Destination films can be boiled down to unsettling but silly, Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein's Final Destination Bloodlines maintains that balance as well as any installment before it. 14 years after Final Destination 5 supposedly brought the horror franchise full circle, Lipovsky and Stein skillfully expand its scope to accommodate an interconnected universe where death steadily attempts to reclaim victims across multiple generations. While a canonically satisfying send-off to the late Tony Todd's William Bloodworth bolsters the series' morbid gravitas, a cast of playful, mostly likable 20-somethings keep proceedings light in juxtaposition to the filmmaker's fiendishly inventive kills. After awaking from recurrent visions in which her grandmother Iris, Breck Bassinger in the past, Gabrielle Rose in the present, dies during the opening of a 1960s Space Needle-type landmark, Stefani Reyes, Kaitlyn Santajuana, leaves college to address the relentless insomnia that's wrecking her stellar academic career. Stefani's divorced parents discourage her from probing too deeply into their family's troubled history for answers, but she locates her estranged grandmother and learns of a detailed conspiracy where death itself has spent several decades picking off not just the people who survived the Space Needle disaster, but their descendants and loved ones. As unlikely as Iris's doomsday scenario seems, Stefani quickly discovers that at least some of her grandmother's theories are true, so the young woman enlists her brother, Charlie, Teo Briones, and cousins to combat the cosmic forces aligning to knock them all off. Yet even when she's able to prevent disaster for one of her relatives, Stefani realizes that death's design is more elaborate and patient than she can anticipate, forcing her to undertake drastic measures to halt the deadly chain of events and save as many lives as possible, even if it comes at the cost of her own. Because of the necessarily, and often literally, explosive incident that sets off each installment's race against death, the Final Destination movies have always been front-loaded. Bloodlines is no different. The bombastic Space Needle sequence, though not quite as relatably anxiety-inducing as the highway pileup in the second film, escalates to a crescendo that's both inevitable and surprising. Where the film differs from its predecessors is in its characters' early receipt of documented proof of the multi-generation spanning network of lives lost and possible methods for disrupting it, thanks to a Bible of sorts that's been constructed by Iris. Having served as Final Destination's on-screen historian since the 2000 original, Todd's posthumous return as Bloodworth offers both a tender tribute to the horror luminary and retroactive connective tissue between the franchise's disparate chapters. Meanwhile, screenwriters Guy Busick and Laurie Evans Taylor create one impishly dangerous situation after another for their characters, while understanding that the film's foundational misdirection, especially in terms of how each one will die, works best when the audience doesn't have to suspend disbelief too much to buy each homicidal sequence of events. If a few of the roles could have benefited from starrier casting, somebody like Meryl Streep as reclusive survivalist Iris would have brought the house down, Santajuana serves as a sturdy, believable anchor for the doomed ensemble. And in particular, Richard Harmon's surprisingly thoughtful turn as Stefani's over-pierced cousin Eric enhances an overall atmosphere of subverted expectations. But as with the strongest installments in the series, Lipovsky and Stein nimbly maintain an equitable balance between gut-wrenching and comically incredible, understanding that life and death stakes can, and with Final Destination, maybe must, be a little fun. In an age of interconnected cinematic universes, it only took 6 films and 25 years to bring together this horror franchise, ironically one where causality is a cornerstone of its mythology. Clever, unpredictable, and fun, Final Destination Bloodlines offers the series a transfusion of creativity that virtually guarantees that it will live to kill again. I wonder what kind of experience people had watching this film without knowing anything about it beforehand. Because for me, it was quite a jarring experience. I watched the Final Destination movies a very long time ago, so I had some idea of what they were about and how crazy things could get. But to be honest, I wasn't expecting this much. The man getting sliced in half by an elevator door, Iris dying brutally with a giant rod piercing through her head. Yes, this film is exactly how I remembered it. Final Destination doesn't hesitate to stretch the limits of logic, kill people in the most absurd ways possible, and even kill children, all for the sake of telling its story. From what I understand, this film has a solid fan base, and people seem to derive deep pleasure from watching others die in horrible ways. I can't blame them. After all, we are the descendants of those who once watched gladiators fight to the death in ancient amphitheaters. But I must admit, this was a bit too much for me. Anyway, let's not reduce the film to just that, because it has cleverly written dialogues, strong performances, and an interesting premise. Trying to resurrect a franchise that has been dead for over 10 years is a bold move in itself. When I first heard about it, I assumed it was made purely for profit. Just another attempt to exploit our nostalgia, especially in an era where even the Naked Gun films are being resurrected. But when I finally watched Final Destination Bloodlines, the film proved me wrong. First of all, I strongly recommend watching this film with a group of friends. I can honestly say that the reactions and loud commentary from a group sitting behind me actually enhanced my movie-watching experience. Some films demand silence. Others, there's absolutely no harm in turning the cinema into a football stadium. Of course, the film doesn't claim to tell a very coherent or realistic story. With a predictable plotline, people are killed off at regular intervals. But unlike the other Final Destination films, this one attempts to explain all the absurdity and builds an origin story. And surprisingly, it succeeds in making it compelling. Alongside the spectacle of people dying, it manages to craft a story that's genuinely intriguing. The actors, quite literally, work wonders. Their chemistry with one another managed to capture my attention in the film's short runtime. Final Destination Bloodlines is definitely the film of the year. At a time when going to the movies has lost its appeal, this is a real reason to go. It makes sense that a gore-soaked horror franchise built around the universal fear that our time is running out would be as elegant and precise as a stopwatch. You can practically hear the ticking sound in Final Destination Bloodlines, the first new entry in the series in 10 years. It's a tour de force of voluptuously bloody slapstick that knows that we know how these movies work. It leans into that familiarity by staging a series of fiendishly elaborate death traps and giving us lots of time to admire their construction, note all of the rude, heartless, or complacent people who are fated to die super nasty deaths, and keep a running list of all of the outwardly ordinary objects that are about to become links in a chain of destruction. Are these movies deep? Yeah, in their way, because they get you thinking about metaphysics, free will, and karma by killing people in chain reaction destructoramas that are framed, lit, and edited with all the dark magic at cinema's disposal. Co-directed by Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein, Bloodlines is, per the subtitle, built around multiple generations in an extended family. Their genetic founder went on a date with her boyfriend in 1959, which was supposed to set the stage for a marriage proposal, but became a catastrophe instead. The location is a newly opened tower that resembles Seattle's Space Needle. We know from our first glance at that thing that it's going down, and it's just a question of when and how. Soon enough, we also learn that Iris isn't feeling queasy because she's afraid of heights. As Iris, Breck Bassinger, and her sweetheart Paul, Max Lloyd-Jones, board an unnervingly rickety elevator and make their way to the restaurant at the top of the tower, the filmmakers cut to so many close-ups of incidents and objects that might come into play that you may laugh at how each new hint about where the scene is headed gets not just presented but unveiled with distorted close-ups and disorienting sound effects. Remember Chekhov's gun, the writing rule that any element that receives a significant introduction in a story should be used somehow? This movie has Chekhov's beer bottle, Chekhov's soul band, Chekhov's nose ring, Chekhov's garden hose and metal rake and trampoline, Chekhov's ice water and ice bucket and glass shards, Chekhov's logging truck, Chekhov's sputtering halogen light, and Chekhov's MRI chamber. This list barely digs beyond the uppermost level of Chekhov's 2025 murder object bag. When it comes to gifts that you did not expect, death makes Santa Claus look stingy. Iris, like many a Final Destination protagonist, has a detailed premonition of the catastrophe that's about to unfold, but is killed anyway. But quite naturally, as per tradition, the splendidly elaborate account of her fate is revealed as a nightmare, dreamt by her granddaughter Stefani, Kaitlyn Santawan, who can't get through the night without reimagining the tower collapse. Wait, what? Granddaughter? Might that suggest that Grandma miraculously survived the disaster? And might she still be alive and able to deliver spooky exposition? And might the existence of a related extended family, including Stefani's kid brother Charlie, Teo Briones, and her cousins Julia, Anna Lore, Bobby, Owen Patrick Joyner, and Eric, Richard Harmon, and her uncle Howard, Alex Zahara, and Aunt Brenda, April Telek, who warned Stefani and Charlie not to get obsessed with their long-disappeared mother Darlene, Raya Kilstead, set the stage for a return? Well, of course. Otherwise, why would I have put an actress name between parentheses? It would be unsporting to discuss the plot in more detail, because it might give away too many of the contraptions and a couple of plot twists that are as amusing as they are clever. Let's just say that the collapse of the tower left 10 to 12 names for Death to cross off his list. Also, that there's a reason why Eric owns a tattoo parlor, and it isn't because we're going to get a tutorial on how to ink a tramp stamp. And that the filmmakers don't keep referencing trains because they're setting up a scene where everybody has a wonderful afternoon at the Railroad Museum. These films are essentially anthologies of fated tragedies, interspersed with discussions of free will and chance. They're strung together by the idea that if you're marked for extermination by death, but somehow end up getting spared, it will pursue you and everyone directly connected to you, no matter how long it takes to wipe you all out. Imagine an accountant traveling all over the world to correct a company's faulty books, or Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal. But replace the Grim Reaper with the people who design those domino-toppling displays that have a zillion moving parts. There's a lot of craft and wit on display here, all in service of an aesthetic not too different from the one that was ascribed to director Sam Raimi back when he was making films like Darkman and Evil Dead movies. What would it look like if the Three Stooges really poked each other's eyes out? Like, if Moe jammed his fingers knuckle-deep into Larry's eye sockets, then Curly came over with a chainsaw to finish him? This movie isn't afraid to go too far. And I mean why too far, from the very start, and keep pushing the outer edge of the envelope, giggling the entire time. It also has a knack for what my dear Judith calls visual colloquialisms, transforming common sayings into pictorial statements or sight gags, like the penny that figures in the opening flashback and keeps, turning up like a bad penny. And let's not forget that pennies are what you place on the eyes of the dead before loading them onto the ferry to cross the river and enter the underworld, because these filmmakers sure didn't. Also, consider that when you toss a penny from a very high place, it creates a false impression of a penny from heaven, right before it makes an impression in your skull. Remember when older relatives would offer you a penny for your thoughts? Those are Stefani's nightmares. There's a moment where a bystander enacts the ancient suggestion, see a penny, pick it up, all day long, have good luck, and visualizations of what goes up must come down and on the wrong track. And there are needle drops so knowingly corny that they become shared jokes between the movie and its viewers, like Etta James's Something's Got a Hold on Me, Air Supply's Without You, with its desperate refrain, I can't live! And Kelly Clarkson's Stronger, What Doesn't Kill You, I don't know if they wanted me to think about the Christopher Reeve movie Somewhere in Time as well, but I did. See it if you can. It's romantic and touching, and there's a penny in it. I digress. There's a sober and thoughtful subtext in Bloodlines. It is similar to, but perhaps subtler than, all of the head games that are constantly being played in science fiction and fantasy movies about parallel timelines and universes, with their babble about anchor beings and canon events, and their discussions of whether you can really change the future or if your actions end up depositing your where the cosmos always knew you would go by way of a different, somewhat longer route. There's an argument to be made that it would save a lot of time if the folks marked for belated deletion by death gave up and got it over with. But then the movies would all be 25 minutes long and no fun. Speaking of the grave, the late, great Tony Todd, who played funeral home proprietor, lore explicator, and series mascot William Bloodworth, makes his final film appearance here, 6 months after his death from cancer. The result is not just a worthy send-off for the character and the man who played him, but one of the very best scenes ever performed by an actor who knew he was dying and decided to make his last performance one for the ages. Hearing that rumbling voice come out of an emaciated and clearly suffering body is more unsettling than any of the film's bloodbaths, but it's also inspiring and moving. Todd was a consummate professional who wanted to give us one last thrill before he left. And he did. But his cameo here is far more than a final IMDb credit. What he does here, in collaboration with his scene partners in the crew, is profound. He uses the inevitability of his death as fuel for his art, and retroactively deepens the whole franchise by connecting the reality of death to its spectacular representations on screen. Todd knew when he showed up on set that he didn't have much time left, and he knew that we would know that he didn't have much time left as soon as we got a look at him. But he embraced all of that. What astonishing control and confidence the man had. Even in a weakened state, he knew he was still a badass, with the presence, power, and voice to fill us with awe. I bet death asked for his autograph. My inbox is filled with the most horrible ways people can die, says Craig Perry, the producer, or as he would prefer, curator of the Final Destination franchise. Over 25 years, his films have punctured, skewered, crushed, flattened, and decapitated men, women, and children in a series of horrifying accidents, and Perry has been a witness to them all. His friends clearly want him to witness many more. But as we speak on video call, just a few weeks before the 6th installment is released, he seems far from traumatized. Instead, he's ebullient, buzzing infectiously about the many gory deaths he has overseen with the same enthusiasm other people might display when talking about their children. If you're not having fun, don't do it, he grins. He has every right to be proud. To date, the films have made more than $657 million, 493 million, worldwide, and helped to terrify a generation of millennials about the dangers that arise not from entering a haunted house or swimming in shark-infested waters, but from the mundanities of taking a shower or driving your car. In the Final Destination movies, death is everywhere. In the first film, released in the spring of 2000, it was on a plane and a teen experiencing a gruesome premonition sniffed it out early, saving himself and a handful of others as it exploded in front of them. But death soon followed them all home and constructed shocking, often grimly amusing Rube Goldberg-style death sequences for them, correcting the imbalance. Sequels inevitably followed, kicking off with mayhem on the road, a roller coaster, a racetrack, and a suspension bridge. The original iteration of the script, once intended to be an X-Files episode, had personified death. But using inanimate objects to achieve its objective is something Perry believes has given the series its staying power. It allows the audience to bring whatever baggage or notions that they have about death, he tells me. It could be cultural or personal, or that moment 2 years ago when they had a near miss and thought, man, if I just stepped right or left, that would have been the end of it. You bring all that to the movie, and it makes it yours. Your experience is unique to you. In the latest film, Final Destination Bloodlines, the formula sees a slight shake-up. The film opens in the 1960s. The premonition haver has found a way to cheat death for decades until the collapse of a Space Needle restaurant that leads to the destruction of a whole family, instead of, as in earlier films, a group of teens or strangers. It was the brainchild of Spider-Man director Jon Watts, who then enlisted directing duo Adam Stein and Zach Lipovsky to breathe new life into a franchise that had been dormant for 14 years. The new film arrives at a time filled with nostalgia horror plays. The 7th chapter of the rebooted Scream franchise has just finished production. A rehaul of I Know What You Did Last Summer starring is out this July, and an urban legend remake was announced last week. But mask slashers aside, is a new generation ready to be scared of, well, everything? Aren't they scared enough? Turns out, not nearly. What are the everyday experiences or everyday objects or everyday feelings that we can ruin for people? Asks Stein, speaking to me with his co-director on a break during the production of Freaks Underground, a sequel to their acclaimed 2018 breakout Freaks. No spoilers, but as the trailers already suggest, this time prepare to be terrified of tattoo parlors, family barbecues, revolving doors, and glass elevators. Inspiration comes to Perry not only via email, but to the entire creative team via the anxieties of everyday life. What if that fell? What if I fell? What if that fell while I was falling, etc.? It's those things that you run into in your daily life all the time, and you just feel a little bit off about, Lipovsky says. Hint for the new film, his apartment overlooks an alley where garbage is frequently collected. Perry jokes that he can't walk into a room without doing a threat matrix. While many of the death scenes might seem cartoonishly far-fetched, it's become surprisingly important for those involved to heavily research just how close to reality they could actually be. I mistakenly referred to a grisly scene involving a monstrously powerful magnetic resonance imaging machine already teased at Comic-Con as outlandish. I was corrected. Top-end MRIs, Perry tells me, can literally pull entire gurneys into them and fold them over. That's all true. Lipovsky adds that he read up on some extremely tragic and horrible stories in his research. Think guns and wheelchairs sucked into machines. It all has to be stuff the audience generally would believe is possible, he says. He goes on to tell me about extravagant crew tests involving mannequins. But how do you center a film on the utter inescapability of death and not make it feel like a depressing slog? It's knowing without diminishing, if that makes sense. Perry says, and this is why I think it's so hard, people don't realize how challenging the tone is in these movies. Is he worried about increased sensitivities with the new generation? The first film featured a pre-9/11 plane crash and a grim shower death mistaken for a suicide. One of the challenges with this storytelling in general is if you have to have trigger warnings for drama, that means you can't have an antagonist, he says. Because antagonists, by their very nature, do terrible things. He adds, I feel like if we get hamstrung by over-analyzing that thing, we're just going to have movies that play like tapioca. It's just not going to be intriguing. Stein agrees that it's incredibly tricky to make so much carnage, so much fun, but the secret is in the bad guy, death. You kind of root for him because of his sense of humor, he says. He's just so clever. Despite the films forcing family members or partners to watch their loved ones get brutally splattered to smithereens in front of them, the franchise isn't really known for its humanity. Here, death doesn't mean all that much, but in the new film, it suddenly does. Tony Todd, who has appeared in all but one of the films, including a voice role in the third one, died in November last year, not long after filming a one-scene cameo. His on-screen farewell is a surprisingly moving moment, the actor looking strikingly frail. Everyone involved knew he was ill, and we weren't sure at certain points whether he would be able to participate, Stein tells me. It was a really unique moment because talking about his own death for the movie on this meta level, he's speaking to the fans about his death. And so in that moment, when he had his final goodbye, we asked him if he would be able to kind of put the script away and do a take where he spoke from the heart about what death means and what life means. It's his honest words of wisdom direct to you. It's a rare moving moment in a film that's otherwise as energetic and fun as the very best of the franchise. The first one turned 20 just after the pandemic kicked in, and with Bloodlines emerging as the world continues to burn in new and old ways, what purpose does a Final Destination film have in 2025? There's a lot of depressing things happening in the world, Lipovsky says, believing that the film will take viewers to a different place outside the real world for a few hours. Stein adds, "The communal experience of watching this movie in a theater is really something to behold. 12 minutes in, when a little boy gets crushed by a falling piano, the entire audience erupts in cheers, and that is something really fun." Final Destination Bloodlines is only $66 million away from breaking a franchise record. Released in theaters on May 16th, the sixth installment in the iconic horror franchise opened with more than $51 million at the domestic box office. In less than a week, its numbers have soared, making the movie one of the highest-grossing movies in the R-rated and horror genres. Per the numbers, Final Destination Bloodlines has grossed $121 million at the worldwide box office, making it the third highest-grossing installment in the franchise after the Final Destination's $187 million record. Its domestic box office earnings currently sit at $67 million, already setting a new high for the franchise. Final Destination Bloodlines had the biggest opening weekend in the franchise, making $102 million worldwide, which gives it an edge. Within a week, the movie already surpassed the three previous installments in the franchise, with only $34 million from becoming the second highest-grossing Final Destination movie. Give it time. The sixth installment will likely end up being the franchise's highest-grossing project. Final Destination Bloodlines also had the biggest production budget in the franchise. However, given that there's a 14-year gap between the fifth and sixth installments, inflation should be taken into consideration. Both 2011's Final Destination 5 and 2009's The Final Destination cost $40 million to make, which roughly equals $56 million to $59 million in 2025. The latest movie had a similarly modest $50 million production budget. It also means that the fourth installment's $187 million earnings in 2009 would equal $278 million in 2025. It wouldn't be a surprise if Final Destination Bloodlines made another $66 million in the coming weeks, considering its massive success at the opening weekend box office and the franchise's popularity over the years. On the other hand, with Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning and Disney's Lilo and Stitch arriving this week, the movie will face tougher competition as well. Regardless, Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein's horror drama has proven to be a hit, already climbing some of the all-time charts within a week of its release, which is very impressive. In addition to being a commercial success, the movie is also the best rated in the Final Destination franchise, with a 92% Rotten Tomatoes score from critics and an 88% audience approval rate. Now, it's pretty inevitable that Final Destination Bloodlines will make the record, but it's a matter of when. Despite having played in theaters for only 3 days, Final Destination Bloodlines has already overtaken the lifetime domestic hauls of several memorable horror movies. Bloodlines exceeded expectations in its opening weekend of release, grossing $51 million domestically. This is the biggest opening weekend haul for an R-rated horror movie in the post-pandemic era, and roughly $3 million higher than fellow Warner Bros. Release Sinners' $48 million opening weekend haul. By the end of its first week, Bloodlines is projected to overtake every film in the long-running Final Destination franchise. Its $51 million haul puts it at the 118th spot on the list of the highest-grossing horror movies in domestic box office history. With $105 million worldwide, Bloodlines has already overtaken the likes of James Wan's Saw, which spawned 10 sequels, Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil, which spawned 6 sequels of its own, and the original Insidious, which has spawned 6 follow-ups. The Final Destination series itself has generated over $750 million worldwide after having debuted in the year 2000. Produced on a reported budget of $50 million, Bloodlines is the first film in the franchise since 2011's Final Destination 5. It's also the best reviewed of the lot, with a 93% score on Rotten Tomatoes. Bloodlines' 93% RT score is hardly in the same league as the franchise's previous best, Final Destination 5's 63% score. In her review, Collider's Emma Keeley described it as both a hybrid sequel and a reboot, and wrote, "Generational trauma, morality, and the conflict between fighting death or just enjoying the time you have all feel more robustly explored here. It doesn't necessarily deliver anything overly poignant, but it does provide this movie with layers that previous installments lacked." Bloodlines is being relied upon to shift the narrative around mainstream horror movies, which have been struggling to perform at the box office over the last year or so. Since Five Nights at Freddy's at the end of 2023, only a handful of mainstream horror films, A Quiet Place Day One and Alien Romulus, have managed to stand out amid a wave of well-received indie films such as Longlegs, Heretic, The Monkey, The Substance, and more. The rest of the year will see the release of films such as 28 Years Later, The Conjuring Last Rites, Predator Badlands M3GAN 2.0, and the I Know What You Did Last Summer reboot. Stay tuned to Collider for more updates. Final Destination Bloodlines has officially made it onto an impressive all-time chart after its most recent box office achievement. The sixth film picks up the franchise after a 14-year hiatus, kept back by various production issues. So far, the release has been a huge success, and Final Destination Bloodlines is the best-reviewed movie in the franchise. It has a 92% tomatometer and 8 out of 10 stars from Screen Rant's Nadir Samara, who called it a phenomenal reboot. Now, Final Destination Bloodlines has officially made an important box office list. Per the numbers, the movie is now in the top 100 horror movies of all time at the domestic box office, taking the number 99 spot. Bloodlines made $56.6 million domestically, passing 2005's White Noise and only ranking slightly behind Saw 5. The movie also hit a worldwide box office milestone by passing the $110 million mark overall. Making the top 100 horror chart is impressive, and doing so after less than a full week in theaters is unprecedented. This total puts it well on its way to becoming the highest-grossing movie of its entire franchise. It has already passed the overall gross of Final Destination 2 and is closing in on the first movie. Domestically, it has only one film to beat, 2009's The Final Destination, which made $66.4 million on its home turf during its release. That movie made $186.1 million worldwide, so Bloodlines still needs over $75 million to pass it. The second weekend performance will indicate how far Final Destination Bloodlines can go. It is a big weekend at the box office, boasting the release of both Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning and Disney's live-action adaptation of Lilo and Stitch. As such, Bloodlines will have to stand out enough to horror audiences to maintain staying power through its second weekend. If it does so, however, it could ascend the all-time horror charts quickly. There's no telling exactly how far it can go, but recent hits like Smile 2 and Longlegs may be in range. The milestone from Final Destination Bloodlines makes 2025 a lot more promising year for horror. Things started a bit slowly with the disappointment of Blumhouse's Wolfman. The box office picked up a bit with releases like Companion and The Monkey, but was knocked back down by unusual horror misfires from A24, including Opus and Death of a Unicorn. More recently, the all-time horror list has been infiltrated by new releases, first with Sinners, which sits at number 3, and now with Final Destination Bloodlines. As more horror films prepare for release, this is a good sign. Final Destination soundtrack album to be released. Release Final Destination. Bloodlines was released in the United States by Warner Brothers Pictures on May 16, 2025, and it was released internationally 2 days prior to its official U.S. release. The film was filmed for IMAX and will be released in both IMAX and standard formats. A double bill special screening was shown in select theaters on May the 9th and 10th, a week before the film's release, which was held on Mother's Day, with the film being retitled to Love at the Skyview. Filmgoers watched the film with their mothers who were under the assumption it was a romantic comedy. The film's trailer was released on March 25, 2025, across 65 markets and was available in 44 different language versions as calculated by Wave Metrics. It garnered 178.7 million views worldwide within the first 24 hours, making it the second most watched horror film trailer behind New Lines, it with 200 million views reception as of May 20th, 2025. Final Destination Bloodlines has grossed $56.66 million in the United States and Canada and $54.1 million in other territories for a worldwide total of $110.7 million in the United States and Canada. Bloodlines was released alongside Hurry Up Tomorrow and was projected to gross $35 to $40 million from 3,523 theaters in its opening weekend. The film made $21 million on its first day, including an estimated $5.5 million from Thursday night previews. That it went on to debut to $51.6 million, finishing first at the box office. Its opening weekend was the biggest for the franchise, even adjusted for inflation, besting the Final Destination 27.4 Lion opening weekend in 2009. Critical response. The film became the best reviewed installment in the franchise on the review aggregator website. Rotten Tomatoes' 92% of 158 critics' reviews are positive. The website's consensus reads, adding some surprising emotional layers onto the Gaulish bones of Final Destination mythology, Bloodlines ingeniously executes grisly set pieces with precision and turns impending doom into outrageous fun. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 73 out of 100, based on 35 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Audiences, pled by CinemaScore, gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale, while those surveyed by Post-Track gave it an average 4 out of 5 stars, with 69% saying they would definitely recommend the film. Todd Gilchrist of Variety called the film clever, unpredictable, and fun, and praised Todd's performance as a tender tribute to the horror luminary and retroactive connective tissue between the franchise's desperate chapters. Frank Sheiksh of The Hollywood Reporter, wrote that the film gives its audiences exactly what they expect, namely a series of ingeniously designed, diabolical Rube Goldberg-style fatalities that are mostly so within the realm of possibility that you'll find yourself crossing the street very carefully after you leave the theater. He also praised Todd's appearance as a poignant reminder that in real life, as in these movies, death comes for everybody. Future Stein noted that the narrative potential remains open-ended, emphasizing the complex and time-consuming nature of developing such films, while he acknowledged the possibility of future installments. He indicated that the creative process requires significant effort and innovation. Perry similarly expressed openness to continuing the franchise, noting that Bloodlines has expanded the creative flexibility of the series, allowing for new narrative directions and connections across different periods. Final Destination Bloodlines movie review. It makes sense that a gore-soaked horror franchise built around the universal fear that our time is running out would be as elegant and precise as a stopwatch. You can practically hear the ticking sound in Final Destination Bloodlines. The first new entry in the series in 10 years, it's a force of voluptuously bloody slapstick that knows that we know how these movies work. It leans into that familiarity by staging a series of fishly elaborate death traps and giving us lots off time to admire their construction. Note all of the rude, heartless, or complacent people who are fated to die super nasty deaths, and keep a running list of all of the outwardly ordinary objects that are about to become links in a chain of destruction. Are these movies deepia in their way because they get you thinking about metaphysics, free will, and karma by killing people in chain reaction destructor armors that are framed, lit, and edited with all the dark magic at cinema's disposal? Co-directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein, Bloodlines is Perthy, subtitle built around multiple generations in an extended family. Their genetic founder went on a date with her boyfriend in 1959, which was supposed to set the stage for a marriage proposal, but became a catastrophe. Instead, the location is a newly opened tour that resembles Seattle Space Needle. We know from our first glance at that thing that it's going down, and it's just a question Of when and how soon Nuff we also learn that Iris isn't feeling queasy because she's afraid of heights. As Iris' restaurant at the top of the tower, the filmmakers cut us so many close-ups of incidents and objects that might come into play that you may laugh at how each new hint about where the scene is headed gets. Not just presented but close-ups and disorienting sound effects, remember Chekhov's gun, the writing rule, that any element that receives a significant introduction in a story should be used. Somehow this movie has Chekhov's beer bottle, Chekhov's soul, band, Chekhov's nose ring, Chekhov's garden hose and metal rake and trampoline, Chekhov's ice water and ice bucket and glass shards, Chekhov's logging truck, Chekhov's sputtering halogen light, and Chekhov's MRI chamber. This list barely digs beyond the upper level of Chekhov's 2025 murder object bag when it comes to gifts that you did. Not expect death makes Santa Claus look stingy. Iris, like many a Final Destination protagonist, has a detailed premonition of the catastrophe that's about to unfold, but is killed anyway. But quite naturally, as per tradition, the splendidly elaborate account of her fate is revealed as a nightmare dreamt by her granddaughter Stephanie, who can't get through the night without reimagining the tower collapse. Wait, what granddaughter might? That suggests that Grandma miraculously survived the disaster, and might she still be alive? And able to deliver spooky exposition. And might the existence of a related extended family, including Stephanie's kid brother Charlie and her cousins Juliana, Law, Bobby, and Eric, and her uncle Howard and Aunt Brenda, who warned Stephanie and Charlie not to get obsessed with their long-disappeared mother Denise at the stage for our turn. Well, of course, otherwise why would I have put an actress's name between parentheses? It would be unsporting to discuss the plot in more detail, because it might give away to many of contraptions and a couple of plot twists that are as amusing as they are clever. Let's just say that the collapse of the tower left 10 to 12 names for Death to cross off his list. Also, that there's R's and Y Ericown Zata 2 parlor, and it isn't because we're going to get a tutorial on how to ink a stamp, and that the filmmakers don't keep referencing trains because they are setting up a scene where everybody has a wonderful afternoon at the Railroad Museum. These films are essentially anthologies of fated tragedies, interspersed with discussions of free will and chance. They are strung together by the idea that if you're marked for extermination by death, but somehow end up getting spared, it will pursue you. And everyone directly connected to you, no matter how long it takes to wipe you all out. Imagine an accountant traveling all over the world to correct a company's faulty books, or in Mar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, but replace the Grim Reaper. With the people who design those domino-toppling displays that have a zillion moving parts, there's a lot of craft and wit on display here, all in service of an aesthetic not too different from the one that was ascribed to director Sam Raimi back when he was making films like Dark Men and Evil Dead movies. What would it look like if the Three Stooges really poked each other's eyes out? Like if Moe jammed his fingers knuckle deep into Larry's eye sockets, then Curly came over with a chainsaw to finish him. This movie isn't afraid to go too far, and I mean way too far from the very start, and keep pushing the outer edge of the envelope, giggling the entire time. It also has a knack for what my dear Judith calls visual colloquialisms, transforming common sayings into pictorial statements or sight gags, like the penny that figures in the opening flashback and keeps, turning up like a bad penny. And let's not forget, that pennies are what you place on the eyes of the dead before loading them onto the ferry to cross the river and enter the underworld, because these filmmakers sure didn't also consider that when you toss a penny from a very high place, it creates a false impression of a penny from heaven right before it makes an impression in your skull. Remember when older relatives would offer you a penny for your thoughts? Those are Stephanus nightmares. There's a moment where a bystander enacts the ancient suggestion, see a penny, pick it up all day long, have good luck and visualizations of what goes up must come down and on the wrong track, and there are needle drops. So knowingly corny, that they become shared jokes between the movie and its viewers, like Etta James, Something's Got a Hold on Me, Air Supplies Without You, and Kelly Clarkson's Stronger. I don't know if they wanted me to think about the Christopher Reeve movie Somewhere in Time as well, but I did see it. It's romantic and touching, and there's a penny in it, I digress. There's a sober and thoughtful subtext in Bloodlines. It is similar to, but perhaps subtler than all of the head games that are constantly being played in science fiction and fantasy movies about parallel timelines and universes, with their babble about anchor beings and canon events and their discussions of whether you can really change the future or if your actions end up depositing you're where the cosmos always knew you would go by way of a different, somewhat longer route. There's an argument to be made that it would save a lot of time if the folks marked for belated deletion by death gave up and got it over with. But the late, great Tony Todd, who played funeral home proprietor, lore explicator after his death from cancer, the result is not just a worthy send-off for the character and the man who played him, but one of the very best scenes ever performed by an actor who knew he was dying and decided to make his last performance one for the ages. Hearing that rumbling voice come out of an emaciated and clearly suffering body is more unsettling than any of the film's bloodbaths, but it's also inspiring and moving. Todd was a consummate professional who wanted to give us one last thrill before he left, and he did. But his cameo here is far more than a final IMDb credit. What he does here in collaboration with his scene partners and the crew is profound. He uses the inevitability of his death as fuel for his art and retroactively deepens the whole franchise by connecting the reality of death to its spectacular representations on screen. Todd knew when he showed up on set that he didn't have much time left, and he knew that we would know that he didn't have much time left as soon as we got a look at him, but he embraced all of that. What astonishing control and confidence the man had, even in a weakened state. He knew he was still a badass with the presence, power, and voice to fill us with awe. I bet death asked for his autograph. If the defining tone of the most successful Final Destination films can be boiled down to unsettling but silly, Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein's Final Destination Bloodlines maintains that balance as well as any installment before it. 14 years after Final Destination 5 supposedly brought the horror franchise full circle, Lipovsky and Stein skillfully expanded scope to accommodate an interconnected universe where death steadily attempts to reclaim victims across multiple generations, while a canonically satisfying send-off to the late Tony Todd's William Worth bolsters the series' morbid gravitas. A cast of playful, mostly likable 20-somes keep proceedings light in juxtaposition to the filmmaker's fishly inventive kills after awaking from recurrent visions in which her grandmother Iris dies during the opening of a 1960s Space Needle type. Landmark. Stephanie Reyes leaves college to address the relentless insomnia that's wrecking her stellar academic career. Stephanie's divorced parents discourage her from probing too deeply into their family's troubled history. Answers, but she locates her estranged grandmother and learns of a detailed conspiracy where death itself has spent several decades picking off not just the people who survived the Space Needle disaster, but their descendants and loved ones as unlikely as Iris' doomsday scenario seems. Stephanie quickly discovers that at least some of her grandmother's theories are true, so the young woman enlists her brother Charlie and cousins to combat the cosmic forces aligning to knock them all off. Yet, even when she's able to prevent disaster for one of her relatives, Stephanie realizes that death's design is more elaborate and patient than she can anticipate, forcing her to undertake drastic measures to halt the deadly chain of events and save as many lives as possible, even if it comes at the cost of her own, because of the necessarily explosive incident that sets off each installment's race against death. The Final Destination movies have always been front-loaded. Bloodlines is no different. The bombastic Space Needle sequence, though not quite as relatably anxiety-inducing as the highway pileup in the second film, escalates to a crescendo that's both inevitable and surprising. Where the film differs from its predecessors is in its character's early receipt of documented proof of the multi-generation spanning network of lives lost and possible methods for disrupting it, thanks to a Bible of sorts that's been constructed by Iris, having served as Final Destination as on-screen historian since the 2000 original Todd's posthumous return, as Bloodworth offers both a tender tribute to the horror luminary and retroactive connective tissue between the franchise's desperate chapters. Meanwhile, screenwriters Guy Busick and Laurie Evans Taylor create one impishly dangerous situation after another for their characters, while understanding that the film's foundational misdirection works best when the audience doesn't have to suspend disbelief too much to buy each homicidal sequence of events. If a few of the roles could have benefited from starrier casting, Santana serves as a sturdy, believable anchor for the doomed ensemble, and in particular, Richard Harmon's surprisingly thoughtful turn as Stephanus' over-pierced cousin Eric enhances an overall atmosphere of subverted expectations. But as with the strongest installments in the series, Lipovsky and Stein nimbly maintain an equitable balance between gut-wrenching and comically incredible, understanding that life and death stakes can be a little fun in an age of interconnected cinematic universes. It only took 6 films and 25 years to bring together this horror franchise. Ironically, one where causality is a cornerstone of its mythology, clever, unpredictable, and fun. Final Destination Bloodlines offers the series a transfusion of creativity that virtually guarantees that it will live to kill again. Other information about this film: Final Destination The Giddy and splatterific Grim Reaper finds increasingly cartoonish and comical ways to get back at those who think they've cheated. Death has been sitting things out for more than a decade. Maybe that's telling in the time since we saw the rise of so-called elevated horror, a trend that arguably began with 2014's The Babadook and enjoyed its biggest success with last fall's Longlegs. Those earnestly artful films tend to shrug off the horror genre's base of pleasures to instead mine drama, trauma, and influences such as Stanley Kubrick, Roman Polanski, and Nicholas Roeg for those feeling a bit trauma-fatigued. I'm happy to say Final Destination is not only back, but better than ever. Not that Final Destination Bloodlines isn't elevated. Director Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein, who broke onto the scene with the inventive low-budget sci-fi spectacle freaks, classed the joint up while refusing to let their movie take itself too seriously. Their 6th chapter embraces the knowingly silly premise and grisly thrills we've come to expect from the 25-year-old series, in which cursed characters meet their demise by way of tanning beds, eye surgery, and logging trucks in Final Destination Death, with its affinity for complicated Rube Goldberg's methods, makes the most mundane and inanimate objects a threat we can never look at. The same way again, but where Bloodlines excels is in the clever and often diabolical storytelling craft and visuals. There's a decadence in the filmmaking that isn't at odds with the campy nature of Final Destination, but instead realizing its full potential. Nowhere is that more obvious than the stunning opening set piece, which kicks things off with a close-up of a young woman in a blindfold. A fun little detail, since she's the one who will be seeing into the future. Her name also happens to be Iris. It's the 60s. Iris is being chauffeured by her boyfriend to a surprise night out. They're attending the opening of a fancy new restaurant at Top House Band, building up the joyous frenzy performing the IE Brothers shout. Anyone familiar with the Final Destination formula knows we're witnessing Iris's premonition, and that things won't end well for the revelers, twisting and shouting on the glass-bottom dance floor. The sequence is engineered to keep us on our toes, anticipating what's to come. But it holds. The tension in such a beautiful, unhurried fashion, affectionately doting over the scenery and chemistry between the characters while caught up in the up-tempo romance of the evening. The thwarted disaster isn't just setting the table for Iris's fate, but retroactively the whole Final Destination franchise. Bloodlines introduces an origin story in its prologue that playfully tinkers with the series' mythology generations later. In the present tense, Iris's granddaughter Stephanie is haunted by that same observation. Deck premonition. She goes digging up buried family secrets to figure out what it all means. Meanwhile, a stockpile begins to form at The family burial plots this time, death isn't just going after who survives the instigating events, but also who inherited their curse. And because the cast can be so charming, especially Richard Harmon as a snarky but sentimental cousin, we might actually be rooting for a few of them to survive a rarity in a franchise where we bought a ticket to watch everyone die in spectacular fashion. The most entertaining kills, which this time around involve everything from lawn tools to an MI, have a Buster Keaton-esque flair for physical comedy. These sequences, along with the plot as a whole, tend to include little callbacks to the past. Buses, barbecues, ceiling fans, and logs make cameo appearances, thrilling little reminders of the havoc they can wreak in a Final Destination. Sure, it's fan service, the kind so many Craven reboots are prone to, but it feels more earned in Bloodlines because they are often building to something fresh, and in one instance, even moving the most sentimental and much written about homage to the franchise's past is the late Tony Todd's return as William Borth, the iconic Candyman actor, is a Final Destination regular playing the mischievous mortician, often spitting some cryptic truth to death's would-be victims. Todd, who appears as Bloodworth one last time to give an improvised monologue, parting words. What little time we have left. The characters listening in that scene, who are scrambling to avoid the inevitable, don't quite heed his advice. The movie, which breathes new life into a franchise about being stalked by death, takes the idea of savoring every moment to heart. I love Final Destination. In fact, for me, the films make up the best horror franchise ever made. This might be a controversial opinion, but with 5 films in the series and no bad ones among them, I would challenge anyone to prove me wrong. This passion was why I was trepidatious to attend the press screening of the 6th installment titled Final Destination Bloodlines, especially as it has emerged 14 years after the last film with so many horror reboots, reimaginings, and regurgitations failing to mimic capture, or sometimes even understand what made the original so amazing. I quite rightly feared the same for my beloved horror series. Thankfully, though, Bloodlines is a brilliant addition to the Final Destination collection, which has shockingly been running since the 2000 original Final Destination set the template for terror 25 years ago. If you have never seen one of these movies, the setup is as stunningly simple as it is endlessly original and centers around a small group of individuals who avoid a horrific and catastrophic disaster through a premonition, only to have death come for them one by one to readdress the cosmic balance that has been undone. What the talented Jeffrey Reich did in his original script was make a slasher movie where the monster was death itself and the means of execution an endless, innovative cycle of freak accidents that played out like ridiculous Rube Goldberg chain reactions. This results in the characters and audience often have no idea what mucked up way anyone is going to die, having a formless supernatural force as the merciless monster that the characters must face. Not only amplifies the fear, but adds a fascinating element of futility. Are they all doomed from the start, or can they change their fate? Add to this the terrific Tony Todd as a reoccurring character and some of the best set pieces in see why Final Destination has been so successful and long-lived, from airplane explosions to motorway pileups to amusement park perils and speedway smashes. The movies kept entertaining us with more and more crazy, creative, and downright disgusting deaths, all the way up to Final Destination 5 in 2011, which perfectly wrapped things up. Bloodlines brings us back further back, in fact, than many may expect, starting in 1968. Where Iris Campbell and her boyfriend are attending the opening of the Skyview restaurant tower. Freaked out from the start, Iris sees several signs of impending doom along her trip up the elevator, across the glass dance floor, and out to the observation deck, but she doesn't act on any of these feelings, and we are forced to witness her and hundreds of other people dying in an immense and insane accident. Flashing forwards to modern day, we realize that this is not Iris's prophecy, but actually her granddaughter Stephanie Reyes is a college student unable to sleep due to the reoccurring nightmares of death and destruction. she is heading home to question her relatives about her strange and violent visions. Stephanie finds that everyone from her father to her uncle and cousins refuses to speak about Iris and the madness she put them all through, driven by an obsession that death was stalking her and her loved ones. The family broke all ties with Iris many years ago and have not heard from her since. Desperate for answers, the young woman heads to find the old lady, unknowingly starting off a chain of events that plunge her nearest and dearest into peril as death finally comes to finish what it started. So many years ago, wonderfully frightening, and familiar. Bloodlines brings you everything you want from a Final Destination film, while also extended the overarching story of the series and actually answering some questions that fans such as myself have wanted to know. Since the start, the film also offers horror icon Tony Todd a fitting final goodbye, and many will find his storyline all the more emotional, knowing how imminent his own death was. The cast are all excellent, and as in so many of the previous parts, they go through as much psychological torture as physical, like the figures of ancient myths and legends who were outcast for their ability to see the future. Stephanie is treated like a freak even by her own family, as so many other Final Destination protagonists have before her. Most importantly, Final Destination Bloodlines is packed with gore-filled, fantastically constructed deaths that are far more up than any freak accidents you have ever seen before. So much of the fun in these films is found by trying to work out what will kill each character, and still being surprised and sickened when you actually see it slotting in alongside all the other equally excellent episodes. Bloodline cements Final Destination as the franchise all other horrors should study if they want to keep people engaged, entertained, and downright petrified for a quarter of a century and counting. More detail. Final Destination Bloodlines could have easily settled for simply doing more unusual deaths caused by the Grim Reaper himself, for foiling him without adding much, but it goes beyond this to become a truly great entry in the franchise, while some entries are better than others. The second is terrific, and the third is fine, but the ending misses the mark, while the fourth one isn't good overall. I have a good amount of respect for this franchise for placing characters who grapple with the ominous feeling of attempting to overcome death, but only coming to closer and more brutal terms. With the reality of everything, Bloodlines takes on this concept as always, but instead of focusing on a group of teens or college-age people who are trying to survive the bloodshed, centers around a literal family who are attempting to survive after premonitions are experienced by one of them. Part of the greatness of this movie traces from the theme of a family that is close, but also very divided in some respects, in between the gruesome deaths and the eerie near misses. The members of this family have moments in which they are forced to reckon with their disconnectedness with past relatives and their frustration from the lapses from some of their own ties, when the sincerity of the bond from some of the bond reveals itself as the movie progresses. It adds greater stakes to the nerve-wracking situation of these people, its impact left on those following down the line for the future ahead. To me, a great horror movie or franchise remembers to add emotional and personal stakes for the people facing the terror at hand. For instance, my favorite horror franchise of all time, Scream, adds intrigue to me because I see the impact that the death of Sidney Prescott's mother has on her, and the strong sisterly connection between the characters played by Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera. Much of Mike Flanagan's horror films and shows work splendidly because they take time to examine the connections and impact left by family or past friends in them, both good or bad. Bloodlines follows this idea by adding scenes of a family believably establishing their connection with another as they attempt to figure out their best approach to outwitting the Grim Reaper. Kaitlyn Santana is good as the fairly strong protagonist who has moments in which her terror from the growing approach of death haunts her, while keeping surprisingly steady in the face of what is slowly happening to her family. Tony Todd has a brief yet powerful final performance, and his thick voice and gravitas leaves an appropriately ominous impact to the characters to whom he speaks and the audience, as he always did in his past work, seeing the original Candyman here. Only further reminds me why he is so missed. The scene stealer, however, has to be Richard Harmon as tattoo artist. Eric Campbell. Harmon leans into the dumbness, but has moments of legitimate pause to linger with the love he has for his family. His character is not good at showing it, but the quiet expression of compassion and concern on his face is hard to miss. He also has some hilarious responses and approaches to the situation surrounding his family, as do a few other members of the family. A great mix of practical and CG-based effects come together to create some of the most innovative and easily most brutal demises in the series. Lawnmowers, specific vehicles, and other unexpected methods of death proceed through the film, and most of the fake-out near misses with death are presented well too, especially in comparison to some of the more predictable fake-outs in a few of the previous films. The editing and lower mock angles add to the uneasiness and bubbling tension of death nearing closer in bizarre and brutal ways. When the deaths occur, the camera tracks and lingers on the staggering size or surprising brutality inflicted on those meeting their demise scenes, such as the opening sequence big for others to view this on the big screens. Sometimes it can be hard to remember which character has which specific familial connection to the other. There is also a twist that happens midway through the film that didn't affect very much, and there were some deaths in the latter half that weren't too hard for me to see coming, that went by fast overall. Though this is a terrific entry in the series, perhaps one of the best since the second, that offers plenty of innovative bits of horror action while diving through its ideas of generational and personal trauma and the lengths to which family looks out for each other amidst the scariness and unpredictability of life. And of course, the end of it, they say. That overnight success in Hollywood actually takes a decade, and that could be said of directing. Team Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein. The duo is riding high thanks to Final Destination Bloodlines, which defied expectations this weekend to land the top-rated opening since the pandemic with $51.7 million domestically. The film also hit big with critics who gave it the best reviews for a horror sequel since James Cameron's Aliens 1986. It was all the more impressive given that this is the pair's first studio feature, and that the franchise on Friday night they hung out with new line boss Richard Brenner and production head Dave Nesta at the AMC Burbank, where they surprised a few crowds with an introduction. They also snuck into a few screenings throughout the weekend, and were pleased to hear audible reactions during dozens of moments in the film. They even bought themselves tickets to a 4DX screening and enjoyed the movie they'd seen hundreds of times in a new way they knew going into the weekend. That things would be good, but they didn't know how good. Then Warner Brothers distribution boss Jeff Goldstein called them on Sunday to inform the pair the film had crossed $100 million globally. On Monday, they got a call from Warner Brothers co-chief Michael Duca, who praised the craftsmanship and intelligence of the movie, and to relay that the studio is invigorated by their revival of the franchise this seemingly overnight. Success came after years of Lipovsky and Stein dreaming of making a big studio movie. The pair cut their teeth helming Disney TV shows, and in their off hours they poured years of their lives into the low-budget cult superhero hit Freaks, which bowed to rave reviews in 2019 and was a hot acquisition title of the Toronto International Film Festival. The momentum from Freaks allowed them to leave their day jobs in TV, and from their multiple studios, hired them to develop various projects that didn't come to fruition. They even sold a Freaks TV show to TNT. Never happened. They got to know the team at New Line a few years ago while toying another project and learned the studio was looking to make a sixth Final Destination with a take from producer John Watts, who wanted to center the story on a family over a period of months. They vied for the job, finally landed it thanks to a now famous Zoom pitch in which one of them appeared to die in Final Destination form. Unlike the characters marked for death in a Final Destination film, this sixth installment in the franchise just felt fated to live, overcoming obstacle after obstacle that might have killed other movies now that Lipovsky and Stein have achieved their dream of becoming bona fide blockbuster directors. They shared with The Hollywood Reporter how it all happened. Adam B. Stein, we were pretty over the moon, but also there was a lot of uncertainty around whether it would be greenlit. It almost felt like the process of making this movie was a bit like avoiding a Final Destination Rube Goldberg, because there were so many obstacles that were dodged along the way, where we thought maybe the movie wouldn't even happen, but it just kept going. There were regime changes at Warner Brothers. It originally was going to be made for HBO Max, and then that strategy changed, and then they moved it over to theatrical, and then as we were moving forward, there were the strikes, and we were right in the middle of that. So the studio had to pay to store the sets, etc., which means either the budget goes up or more likely the studio subtracts those delay costs from your budget. Stein doing Freaks and having produced a movie at a really tiny budget gave us lots of tools for figuring out how to make the most of the money that we had. And when there were budget crunches like that, we were able to work with the team to figure out how to get all the money on screen. With Freaks, you had no margin for error. So you started testing the movie during the script phase, where you'd invite friends and family over for pizza to read the script and share their thoughts. Was there an equivalent of that on Final Destination Lipovsky? We actually did do that quite heavily on Final Destination with New Line's blessing. We took a lot of the ideas that we developed with Freaks into Final Destination, especially with how intricate some of these set pieces are, where we did script readings all the way through development. We did some previous, which we kept showing to people in the crew and things like that. And then during the editing process, we would show the movie to a small group with pizza, basically every 2 weeks. And then with New Line's help, we did several larger friends and family screenings of 100 people at a time. Stein, when it came to do additional photography, we were very surgical with what we knew would improve the movie, that we could take something that was already testing really well and then really take it to the next level. Lipovsky, whenever we had production meetings, we'd start at the beginning of the script. By the time we were done talking about the opening, the meeting would be over. And then we'd have to have another production meeting for the rest of the movie. And that would always be the case, Stein. We built this enormous set on stage. It was 110 feet across this circular restaurant that was then surrounded by a custom volume wall for the view that was only one of the eye. I think it's 5 or 6 sets that made up the sky view sequence. We had separate sets for when the set was tilted and a separate one that people could fall out of and a separate one that she's hanging on at the end. Lipovsky, not only did we have to find this whole cast of amazing actors, but they had to work in a way where it seemed like they had the chemistry of having been related for a very long time. And we wanted to play a lot with the structure of Final Destination, where in the past films, characters are known as being kind of stereotypical or one-dimensional, and then they die, which allows you to kind of hate them so that you enjoy their death. In this case, we wanted a lot of the characters to start in that place. But then you would discover that there was all these other layers to them that you didn't expect. Stein producer John Watts deserves a lot of credit for coming up with that initial concept, but also shepherding the heart of the movie. His Spider-Man movies are sort of known for having all the spectacle and fun of Spider-Man, but also retaining a particular vision of heart and character-driven comedy. And that was an influence that he had on this film all throughout the process. He was pitching jokes. Paco the Turtle was his idea. Stein. We had amazing writers on this movie, but we still always love to take an opportunity to unleash the actors with improved. We get the movie as scripted. but then would say, okay, on this next one, do whatever you want. Improvise, say new things. 90% of what happens in those is not usable, but then the 10% can work. And for that moment with Richard Harmon, who plays Eric, who's an incredible improviser, we asked him to leave the room and every time say something different about Jerry Fenbury. There were so many good takes. It was really hard to choose Zach Lipovsky. We went back through all the previous Final Destination movies, broke down every different type of Final Destination death, how they worked, which ones worked well, which ones didn't, how many omens were part of each one, how much the audience knew the person was going to die or not, how many twists there were. We graphed all that stuff out. There's all these different ways that a Final Destination set piece works, separate from the opening set pieces. There are ones we called escape deaths, where the character knows that they are marked for death, but they are trapped and they can't get out. There's ones where they're completely oblivious, where the audience knows death's coming for them, but the character does not. There's ones called bus hits, where neither the audience nor the character knows, and it just comes out of nowhere. Zach Lipovsky, he had been ill for quite a while, so the whole time making the movie, we knew he was sick. As we were getting closer to filming the movie, it was clear that he was well enough to be in the film, but that it was very likely his last Final Destination movie. We knew his mortality would be a big part of the story, and he was a big part of crafting that narrative. He was very, very eager to be in the movie. He was so excited once he was on set, and when you look at the other Final Destinations movies, his character is very mysterious. He kind of comes in for these scenes. He has no backstory. The audience has been clamoring for answers as to who this character is. We really wanted to give him more of an origin story, give a lot more to why he's been doing all the things he's been doing, but then also work with him carefully to give him an ending as well and give him a goodbye. It was an incredibly unique and special situation where not only narratively did his character make sense to be commenting on mortality and his own mortality, but to give an actor an opportunity to speak to the audience about mortality and kind of what it's all about and say goodbye. It was a great responsibility for all of us that were there. And he was a huge partner in that, in the final moment of the scene that he's in. We actually told him to throw away the script for a minute and just speak from the heart about what is it all about, because it's something he's living through. And the final take that's in the movie is his take of just saying, life is precious. Enjoy every single minute that just came straight out of him. And then he kind of winks and smiles and says good luck and does his classic charm and walks away. That was a pretty incredible moment to witness on set. Lipovsky, most of the films end with the hero's not escaping, but it's a very tricky thing to pull off. Final Destination in general is a very difficult type of movie to make because the structure is so well established. Finding a way to make the films feel surprising, even though the audience feels like they know exactly what's going to happen, it was one of our biggest challenges. So it was great to hear that was surprising to you. We kept trying to kind of zig and zag so that people wouldn't know what was going to happen, Stein. That's what makes this movie special, I think, is that it's supposed to be fun. We always said we wanted to make a movie where the audience is watching from behind their fingers. They can't bear to watch the screen, but they are still smiling and laughing at the same time. Stein, we just love making movies. So anytime we get to make a movie is an exciting experience for us. The best thing about it is seeing it with an audience. The audience reaction in the theater is just so much fun. We love to sit in the back of the theater and hear the little rumblings of suspense as it ripples through the theater. Extra information, the Final Destination franchise is finally back after a 14-year hiatus, but at the risk of writing a shameless pun, it could be. Dead on Arrival Halloween 2018 kicked off a new era for horror legacy sequels. With Hollywood studios reviving any IPs they could still get their hands on. From The Craft Legacy 2020 to Cannes 2021 to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022 to The Exorcist, Believer 2023, the success rate of bringing horror franchises back has been very hit or miss, even in the instances when the revival was initially successful, like with Scream 2022 and Saw X 2023. Those efforts soon ran into a war, as Scream 7 and Saw 11 have since faced extremely tumultuous development. To be fair, a sixth installment in the Final Destination series had been planned since way before the COVID-19 pandemic. How the movie took its final form in Final Destination, Bloodlines, can be attributed to a few creatives, starting with producer John Watts. Watts developed the script for Bloodlines, with screenwriters Laurie Evans Taylor and Guy Busick, the latter of whom co-wrote Ready or Not, 2019, Scream 2022, Scream 6 2023, and Abigail. 2024, four radio silence filmmakers, Matt Bettinelli and Tyler Gillett, for those curious. Busick is also writing on Scream 7 and the much-anticipated sequel, Ready or Not, Here I Come. Directors Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein, along with longtime franchise producers Craig Perry and Sheila Hanahan Taylor, are the last crucial pieces to tout. The collective behind Final Destination, Bloodlines, Lipovsky, and Stein made waves with their beloved indie sci-fi thriller Freaks 2018, and then went on to helm the 2019 live-action Kim Possible movie for Disney Channel. Surprisingly, the directing duo is a perfect fit for the yet unpredictable chaos of the Final Destination series, framing the complex yet amusing Rube Goldberg and setups for each death scene with devilish glee. Truly, the major setbacks of Final Destination Bloodlines fall on the script, which borrows too much from other horror legacy sequels and is comical to the point of self-parody, while humor became a prominent element throughout the previous Final Destination sequels, more notably the Final Destination 2009 and Final Destination 5 2011. Fans often take for granted how terrifying the original trilogy was, similar to how the Saw franchise grew an unserious reputation with general audiences. Thanks to its overindulgent sequels, Final Destination was eventually seen as just an excuse to see people die hilariously. Complicated deaths on the big screen now, without exaggeration. Bloodlines features some of the most absurd deaths in the franchise. People get bent, swung around, squashed, and fall out of buildings as if they were in a classic Looney Tunes cartoon, yet very few of these set pieces are actually scary. Final Destination. Bloodlines centers on Stephanie Reyes, a once straight-A college student who has been experiencing a gruesome recurring nightmare. Her dreams take her to the grand opening of the Skyview Tower in 1969, when its luxurious top-level restaurant collapsed and caused dozens to fall to their doom. Only this didn't happen. One woman saw the tragedy in a premonition and managed to stop everyone from dying that day. Of course, as fans know, you should never change the course of death's plans. That woman in Stephanie's dreams turns out to be her estranged grandmother, Iris Campbell, whose act of heroism has inadvertently put her entire bloodline on a path to certain death. The lineage element of Final Destination Bloodlines introduces a fresh spin on the franchise's existing law. This time, audiences follow an entire family that was never supposed to exist according to Death's plans, and it's up to Stephanie to figure out the order in which her mother, younger brother, uncle, and cousins are all meant to die. The stakes feel more personal compared to previous entries, yet the screenplay's highly melodramatic dialogue helps none of the actors leaning into pure campus. Is one thing, and Final Destination is certainly no stranger to that, but constantly poking fun at yourself to look witty is a whole other cheap habit that's now annoyingly common among legacy sequels at its worst. The sixth Final Destination movie feels like it's borrowing one too many pages from another recent horror legacy sequel. Scream 2022 again. Both films share one of the same screenwriters. While Scream can get away with making fun of itself due to its meta backbone, that same type of humor does not come off as genuine here. Because Stephanie inherited her grandma's ability to sense when death is about to make its move, all duties of exposition essentially fall on her early in the plot. She literally explains to her whole family how the rules of Final Destination work, something that every character in this series eventually learns, though, not in a comical way. The protagonist learning how to break the rules of death is a staple of this franchise, and yet Final Destination. Bloodlines often plays that aspect for laughs. Sometimes this comedic setup succeeds at crafting a hysterical scenario that highlights just how ridiculously entertaining Final Destination can be. Other times it leads to an unfunny gag that only adds to this movie's self-indulgence. Oh, and that self-indulgence grows harder to ignore. This isn't a criticism about throwing in Easter eggs and callbacks to past films. That is to be expected for a legacy. A sequel like this, however, when the iconic log truck from Final Destination 2 2003 becomes a recurring bit, there's no excuse for this movie's lack of originality for all the bloody mayhem that directors Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein managed to conjure up. Little of it is brought to life via practical effects. Final Destination Bloodlines certainly looks the cheapest in terms of its kills when compared to the rest of the series. Thanks to some unpolished CGI, still there are a few insane examples that deserve their flowers, such as a scene featuring a magnetic mine machine and another with a garbage truck. The opening Sky Tower sequence is also a delightfully deranged welcome back moment for the franchise. But of course, none of these sequences come close to capturing real-life anxieties like possibly dying on a freak roller coaster. Accident in Final Destination 3, 2006, death itself doesn't have nearly as strong a presence in the story as well. Even in the weaker sequels, death feels like an invisible presence that is looming right over the characters' heads. Plenty of people are going to be undeniably happy that Final Destination is back after so long. But should that nostalgia-driven hunger come at the cost of a lackluster movie, certain bats hit. Crazy set pieces, Kaitlyn Santa's admirable leading performance, and a heartwarming final send-off for the late Tony Todd keep a sincere narrative of fully appreciating our time on this earth with family from totally falling apart at the end of the day, though. This is the same Final Destination film you've seen before. Final Destination. Bloodlines is late to the party. Its predecessor, Final Destination 5, was released 14 years ago, a veritable eon in film-going terms, especially when you consider it was shot and released in 3D body count. Horror still has its audience, but it hasn't been the genre's bread and butter in a very long time. It must also be said that Bloodlines isn't even 2025's first horror movie about the disembodied specter of death, creating cartoonishly brutal tableau of murder. Osgood Perkins the Monkey both excelled in and elevated that space, but as it turns out, Bloodlines is only late because it was stopping at the store to pick up beer and fireworks, and boy did it come ready to irresponsibly mix those two things from the moment it kicks the door down with its stellar opening. Sequence. The newest addition to the Final Destination family maintains a laser focus on making sure everyone goes home with good stories to tell. There's a real sense of homecoming in Bloodlines' extended 1960s set intro, which follows lovebirds Iris and Paul on the way to the top of the sky view for a night out. Fate pulls Iris' attention to seemingly disconnected images throughout the evening: an overcrowded elevator, a creepy problem child in a bow tie, a cook working with an open flame, a glass dance floor suspended hundreds of feet in the air. Co-directors Adam Stein and Zach Lipovsky use Iris' growing paranoia to set the stage for disaster right out in the open. Each domino they line up is highlighted with such tongue-in-cheek attention that by the time the band's playing the Ely Brothers shout and all, those dominoes start to fall. It's clear that Bloodlines is going to be leaning into comedy harder than any Final Destination before it. It's a tonal shift that pays off spectacularly with clear reverence not just for the death traps. at the franchise's heart, but for the way the component parts of those traps fit together and build off each other in increasingly ridiculous ways. Death's scythe never falls quite the way you expect it to in Bloodlines, with pieces of the killer puzzles coming into play in consistently surprising ways. It's a shell game that Bloodlines plays not just with its causes of death, but with who's actually the target of any given trap. And these carefully constructed moments rarely miss by the end of the prologue. Stein and Lipovsky have treated us to an entire movie's worth of over-the-top kills, and we haven't even met our lead character yet. The directors are singing from the Sam Raimi hymn book, with a kinetic style that succeeds on both the horror and comedy fronts and comes across clearly in the cinematography and editing. Special mention has to go to the effects here, which blend practical and VFX elements extremely well as bodies are smashed, and stuffed. These sequences feel a little less effective than the others. One at a tattoo parlor comes to mind, but even that one sets up a pretty hilarious joke for the next scene, as if acknowledging that we're all running on borrowed time. Bloodlines wastes only a few of the precious 110 minutes we spend with it. The tragedy at the Skyview spins out into the present day as college student Lewis is plagued with visions of the events so disruptive she's been placed on academic probation. Final. Destination movies have always been built around premonitions of tragedies which have yet to occur, by shaking up the formula with Steph investigating her relationship to a tragedy that happened before she was born. Bloodlines gets off to a pretty intriguing start. That intrigue doesn't last long, though the movie rushes to reveal why Steph is having these visions and how the Skyview tragedy connects to deaths happening in the present day. Steph's friends and family, who make up the majority of the supporting cast, aren't the types to slow down for serious and broody monologues about mortality. They are a little less complicated than that. A little stupid. Lots of these characters are dumber than a box of rocks. But here, that feels appropriate, given that they need to be just oblivious enough to not see the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. Steph's extended family are like the Avengers of teen horror movie archetypes, and they know it. They are in close conversation with the audience's knowledge of not just the horror genre, but of the established rules of Final Destination. By comparison, Steph's growing ability to see the code of this murder matrix sets up some great moments. But outside of that, her characterization is rather thin. Kaitlyn Santana deserves credit for keeping Bloodlines emotionally grounded, even in the face of a superfluous subplot about Steph's estranged mom that kicks off a little too late to have any real impact. Bloodlines very wisely positions itself as an entry point for newcomers, which makes sense given how sparsely connected the first 5 Final Destination films are. But the movie does take care to give love to some of the franchise's most memorable imagery references that are obvious but unobtrusive to enjoying Bloodlines on its own terms. A little more effort is exerted to make space for the late Tony Todd swan song as the ominous Bloodworth the horror icon usually stops by Final Destination movies to muse on the nature of death, but here in Bloodlines that moment takes on powerful symbolism. Todd's scene was clearly devised with the intention of giving him a chance to bid farewell to his most ardent fans. The gravity that he is famous for hits like a freight train here, helped enormously by some wonderful camera work that often frames Todd as if he's talking directly to the audience. It's a powerful final bow, which few in this space are afforded, and that fewer still deserve more. This film, directed by Zach Lipovsky, Adam Stein, screenplay by Guy Busk, Laurie Evans, Taylor story by John Watts, Guy Busk, Laurie Evans, Taylor, produced by Craig Perry, Sheila Hanahan, Taylor John Watts, Dianne McGunigle, Toby Emmerich, starring Kaitlyn Santana, Teo Briones, Richard Harmon, Owen Patrick Joyner, Anna Law, Breck Basinger, Tony Todd. Cinematography, Christian Sabolt, edited by Sabrina Petra, music by Tim Wynn. Production companies, New Line Cinema, Practical Pictures, freshman year. Fireside Films, distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures, release date May 16th, 2025 running time 110 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $50 million, box office $110.8 million. So guys, this is the review of Final Destination Bloodlines movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe West Films to our channel. Thanks for watching.